A California mom vanishes jogging on November 2, 2016. 22 days later, she stumbles onto a highway, bound in chains, branded, beaten, and starved. The nation cries for her. Strangers donate nearly $50,000. Her husband weeps on every major network. This is the case of Sherri Papini. And every single bruise on her body was something she asked for. Welcome to Abyss of Crime, where we shine a light on the darkest corners of human behavior. Tonight, we sit with a woman who branded her own skin with a wood-burning tool, cut off her own hair, and starved herself down below 100 pounds so the world would believe two Hispanic women kidnapped her at gunpoint. She was, in fact, on a quiet street in November 2016. Costa Mesa, California, living with her ex-boyfriend, eating takeout, sleeping in his bed. Subscribe now and let's get into it. Stick with us until the end, because we will show you exactly how a man with no connection to any crime agreed to brand her, injure her, and drive her 600 miles in his trunk because she convinced him it was love. Here's the thing that still makes investigators grind their teeth. For 22 days, the FBI ran a full-scale abduction investigation. Helicopters, ground teams, cadaver dogs through Shasta County. Sketch artists drew two fictional women based on her description. Those sketches went national. Latina women in Northern California reported being followed, harassed, watched in grocery store parking lots. Real people, real fear, based on a lie. And get this. When Sherri finally walked out of that car on November 24th, 2016, waving her arms on Interstate 5, she had a chain still locked around her waist, a brand fresh on her right shoulder, hair chopped to the scalp, nose broken. She told police she had been tortured by two women in a dark room. She stuck to that story for nearly 6 years. Keep that brand in mind. The chain on the roadside, dropped in the gravel like a prop after a stage play. We'll come back to it in Chapter 5. Tonight, we're going to walk you through who Sherri Papini really is. We'll meet the husband who believed her completely. We'll trace the fake attackers. We'll sit in on the FBI interview where her entire story collapses in under 4 hours. And we're going to ask a harder question. Why did an 18-month sentence feel like a slap on the wrist when other women in this country have done years for far less? Because the uncomfortable truth is this. If Sherri Papini had been black, or Latina, or poor, the manhunt would not have lasted 22 hours, let alone 22 days. The country believed her because she looked like the kind of woman the country is trained to believe. So, how does a suburban wife and mother of two pull off a hoax this elaborate? Stay with us. Before we meet Sherri, we need to meet the man who spent 22 days believing his wife was dead. Keith Papini was 34 years old in November 2016. He worked at Best Buy as a tech supervisor. Quiet guy. The kind of husband who packed his wife's lunch in the morning and texted her when he parked at work. Co-workers described him as the guy who never raised his voice, never complained, kept a framed photo of his kids on his desk in a cracked plastic frame he refused to replace because his daughter picked it out. He and Sherri met in 2006, married in 2009. 2 children, a little girl and a little boy, both under 5 at the time she disappeared. He was, by every account we have, completely devoted to her. Which matters, because he is in a real sense one of the victims here. Then there are the other victims, the ones Sherri never named but absolutely harmed. 2 Hispanic women, entirely fictional, invented from her imagination and drawn by a police sketch artist. Those sketches went on every news channel in the country. Real Latina women in Shasta County reported being stared at in Walmart parking lots. One woman told reporters a stranger followed her to her car and screamed at her to confess. She had never met Sherri Papini in her life. And then there's the public, the strangers who gave money. A GoFundMe raised nearly $49,000 for Keith and the kids during the search. Neighbors put up flyers. A local cadaver dog handler volunteered 3 weekends in a row, hiking creek beds in the rain, looking for a body that did not exist. Think about that for a second. A man gave up 3 weekends with his own family to search for a woman who was, at that exact moment, eating dinner 600 miles away with a man she had been in love with in high school. Now let's meet Sherri herself. 34 years old, stay-at-home mom, blonde, petite, blue-eyed, the face that ends up on every missing person poster in America because it is the face American media knows how to sell. She ran a small online business selling handmade goods. She posted family photos on Facebook constantly. Her coffee order, according to friends, was a medium hazelnut with extra cream from the Dutch Bros on Hilltop Drive. She loved Disneyland. She had a habit of taking a run every afternoon while the baby napped. Her last normal morning was a Tuesday, November 1st, 2016. She dropped the kids at daycare. She texted Keith a photo of the toddler. She told a friend she was going for a jog the next day on the trail near Sunrise Drive, Mountain Gate, California. That's the detail we need to hold on to. She told people she was going jogging. She made sure people knew the route. She made sure her phone, her earbuds, and a lock of her own blonde hair would all end up on the pavement where somebody would find them. So, what did investigators actually discover that afternoon? November 2nd, 2016, around 2:30 in the afternoon. Keith Papini gets home from work and the house is empty. The kids are still at daycare. That is not normal. Sherri always picks them up. Always. He checks the Find My iPhone app. The phone pings less than a mile from the house. On Sunrise Drive. He drives there. He parks. And he finds it on the gravel shoulder. Her phone, her earbuds, and a clump of long blonde hair. He calls 911 at 6:44 p.m. The Shasta County Sheriff's Office responds within 20 minutes. By nightfall, the scene is taped off and a search is underway. Here's what the deputies are told. Sherri is 34, roughly 100 pounds soaking wet, runs this same route every day, has never once failed to pick up her kids. The hair on the ground appears to have been pulled out by force. The phone screen is cracked. To any investigator looking at that scene, this reads as an abduction. Textbook. A small woman grabbed off a quiet road in broad daylight. The case goes federal within 48 hours. The FBI joins the Shasta County detectives. An Amber Alert cannot technically be issued because she is an adult, but the media treats it like one. Her face is on every channel by the weekend. From a profiling standpoint, the scene was too clean. Real abductions leave signs of struggle across a wider area: scuffed gravel, blood spatter, dragged footprints. This scene had 3 items placed in a line: phone, earbuds, hair, almost curated. A trained investigator should have flagged the staging on day 1, but nobody did, because Sherri Papini looked the part. So where do investigators turn for suspects? Same place they always turn. The husband. Keith is brought in. He agrees to a polygraph. He passes cleanly. His phone records put him at Best Buy all day. Co-workers confirm. Surveillance cameras in the break room confirm. He is off the list within 72 hours. And that is where the case hits a wall. No husband. No stalker in the area. No sex offender registry hits on Sunrise Drive. No surveillance of a suspicious vehicle. Detective Sergeant Brian Jackson and his team start running down every lead they can find, and every lead dies. Meanwhile, the GoFundMe keeps climbing. Keith goes on Good Morning America. He sobs on camera and begs for his wife back. The whole country is watching, and every day that passes, investigators know the odds of finding her alive are dropping. By day 15, cadaver dogs are in the creek beds. By day 20, the FBI is quietly preparing the family for the worst. And then, on Thanksgiving morning, the phone rings. Keep that word in your head. Thanksgiving. Because the timing of her return was not an accident. Stay with us for Chapter 4. November 24th, 2016. Thanksgiving morning. Around 4:30 a.m. A driver on Interstate 5 near Yolo County, California, sees a woman waving her arms on the side of the road in the dark. She is barefoot. She has a chain around her waist. Her hair is hacked off almost to the scalp. He pulls over. He calls 911. First responders get there in minutes. The woman is Sherri Papini, alive. 101 pounds, nose broken, shoulder freshly branded with a symbol nobody can immediately identify. She is rushed to Woodland Memorial Hospital. Keith is called. He drives south through the dark and meets her in the ER. And here is where the story the country wants to hear begins. She tells investigators she was jogging on Sunrise Drive when an SUV pulled up. Two Hispanic women jumped out, one with a handgun. They forced her in. They drove her to a dark location she could not describe. For 22 days, she said, they held her in a closet. They beat her. They branded her. They cut her hair. They force-fed her just enough to keep her alive. And then, for reasons she could not explain, they drove her to the side of the highway and let her go. Detectives ask her to describe the women. She gives detailed descriptions. Thin eyebrows, thick accents, one older, one younger. A sketch artist sits with her. The sketches are released nationally within 48 hours. Real Latina women across Northern California start reporting harassment. A family in Redding, California says a stranger spat at the mother in a gas station and called her a kidnapper. Meanwhile, inside the hospital, the FBI is quietly running forensics. And the forensics are screaming. Her body has DNA on it. Male DNA. Specifically on her clothing and underwear. Not two women. A man. The brand is a symbol the FBI cannot match to any known hate group, cult, or trafficking ring. It looks homemade. The chain around her waist, the kind you buy at a hardware store for $40, locked with a padlock any teenager could pick. It does not look like the work of professional kidnappers. It looks like the work of somebody with a Home Depot receipt. What do you think an investigator does when the physical evidence says one thing and the victim says another? Drop your answer in the comments before we get to Chapter 5. Because what happens next is the FBI makes a quiet decision. They publicly support the victim. They privately stop believing her. And they start running that male DNA through every database they have access to. For over 5 years, they run it. For over 5 years, they get nothing. The case goes cold publicly. Sherri does a People magazine interview in 2017. She writes a blog post called Survivor. She tells her story on 2020, and the whole time, one FBI agent in Sacramento, California, refuses to close the file. Remember that agent. We meet him in Chapter 5, August 2020, nearly 4 years after Sherri walked off that highway. FBI Special Agent Kyle Wagoner reopens the file and runs the male DNA profile through a newer database, and this time he gets a hit. The DNA belongs to a man named James Reyes. He lives in Costa Mesa, California, 600 miles south of where Sherri was supposedly held. He has no criminal history. He has no connection, on paper, to the Papini family, except for one thing. In high school, roughly 15 years earlier, he dated Sherri. Agents drive to his house. They knock on his door. They do not accuse him of anything. They just ask if he knows a woman named Sherri Papini. And James Reyes starts talking, and he does not stop. Here is what he tells them. In the months before her disappearance, Sherri reconnected with him online. She told him her husband beat her. She told him her husband was going to kill her. She begged him to help her disappear. On November 2nd, 2016, he drove up to Pine, Mountain Gate, California. He met her on Sunrise Drive. She got in his car voluntarily. She pulled out a chunk of her own hair and dropped it in the gravel next to her phone and earbuds. They drove 600 miles back to his apartment in Costa Mesa. She lived with him for 22 days. She ate his food. She slept in his bed. And she asked him, over and over, to hurt her. She brought a wood-burning tool. She instructed him where to brand her. She asked him to hit her in the face hard enough to break her nose. She asked him to starve her. She asked him to beat her legs with a baseball bat so her bruises looked real. And here is the part that still haunts investigators. He did it. He did every single thing she asked. He did it because she told him she loved him. On Thanksgiving morning, he drove her to Interstate 5, chained her with a chain she had purchased herself, and let her out of the trunk. He drove back to Costa Mesa. He went to work the next morning like nothing happened. Agents ask him for proof. He gives them everything. Text messages, receipts for the brand, the chain, the padlock, photos on his phone of her eating takeout in his apartment on day 12, smiling, wearing his hoodie. Remember that chain we told you to hold on to in Chapter 1? It came from a Home Depot 12 minutes from James Reyes's apartment. The receipt is in his wallet. The FBI now has everything. DNA, receipts, photos, a confession from the accomplice. All they need is her. On August 13th, 2020, two FBI agents sit across from Sherri Papini at a table in Redding, California. They tell her they know. They show her the receipts. They show her James Reyes's photos. And Sherri Papini doubles down. She tells them James Reyes did kidnap her. She says he was working with the two Hispanic women. She lies to federal agents for 4 more hours. And that lie, that exact lie in that exact room, is what turned a civil embarrassment into a federal crime. If this happened today, it would dominate the news for months. Think Jussie Smollett, think the Gabby Petito coverage, except Sherri Papini actually got the full national manhunt those other cases could only dream of. On March 3rd, 2022, Sherri Papini was arrested at her home in Redding, California. The charges were mail fraud and making false statements to a federal officer. 35 counts in total. The mail fraud counts came from the disability checks and victim compensation money she collected from the state of California under false pretenses, roughly $30,000 she took from a fund set up for real crime victims. She pled guilty in April 2022. On September 19th, 2022, a federal judge sentenced her to 18 months in federal prison. She was ordered to pay $309,000 in restitution. Most of that was for the man-hours the FBI and Shasta County spent looking for a woman who was not missing. 18 months. Let that sit. 18 months for a 22-day federal investigation, a statewide panic aimed at Hispanic women, and nearly $50,000 in donations taken from strangers who believed she was being tortured in a basement. Now let's compare. A black woman in Ohio named Tanya McDowell was sentenced to 5 years in 2012 for enrolling her son in the wrong school district. 5 years for wanting her kid in a better school. Sherri Papini weaponized a racial stereotype, terrorized real Latina families, stole from real crime victims, and got 18 months in a low-security facility. She served her sentence at Federal Correctional Institution, Dublin, California. She was released in August 2023. Meanwhile, Keith Papini had already filed for divorce in 2022. He was granted full custody of both children. In court filings, he described feeling, and we are quoting loosely here, like a man who had been married to a stranger. He has not spoken publicly since the sentencing. James Reyes was never charged with a crime. Prosecutors determined he had been manipulated and deceived, and that charging him would be punishing a man Sherri Papini had used as a weapon against himself. He cooperated fully. He testified. He went back to his life in Costa Mesa. By all accounts, he is still processing what happened. That chain from the Home Depot receipt, it sits in an FBI evidence locker somewhere in Sacramento, California, a prop from a stage play the audience paid for. And the two women from the sketches, they were never real. But the women who were harassed because they looked like the sketches, they are real. They have never received a single public apology from Sherri Papini. Not one. We want to ask you one more thing. Do you think 18 months was enough? Tell us honestly in the comments. We read them. Because the question this case leaves behind is not really about Sherri. It is about who we believe and why, and how much suffering we are willing to cause strangers to protect a story we want to keep telling ourselves. So where does the Sherri Papini case stand today? She served her 18 months. She is out. She lives quietly. In 2024, she gave a sit-down interview to a documentary crew in which she admitted the kidnapping was a hoax, but claimed she was abused by James Reyes during the 22 days. An accusation James Reyes and the FBI both reject, and which no physical evidence supports. In other words, even after pleading guilty, she is still rewriting the story. The Shasta County Sheriff's Office has closed the case. The FBI considers it closed. The GoFundMe donors were never made whole. The Latina women who were harassed in Redding, California got no public acknowledgement. Keith Papini is raising 2 children who will one day Google their mother's name and read every word of this. Here is what we take from this. Missing white woman syndrome is a real thing. When the face on the poster is blonde and petite and middle class, we mobilize helicopters and federal agents and cadaver dogs. When the face is anything else, the file sits on a desk. Sherri Papini knew this, instinctively or otherwise, and she used it. She used a racial stereotype the same way a con artist uses a costume. And the uncomfortable lesson is not just about her. It is about all of us. The strangers who donated, the journalists who did not ask hard questions, the investigators who saw a too clean scene and believed it anyway. If something feels off about a story, even a story you desperately want to be true, say something. If a friend's account of what happened to them keeps shifting, pay attention. If someone in your life is using a fear of strangers, of a specific kind of person, of a faceless threat, to explain something that does not add up, trust that feeling. Trust your instincts. Ask the second question, the uncomfortable one. Because the people who were hurt the most by Sherri Papini were not the FBI or the donors. They were the women who walked into grocery stores in November 2016 and felt strangers stare at them because of a sketch that was never real. Those women deserved better from her. They deserved better from us. That's another descent into the abyss. Watch yourself out there.